Yeah, what Scott wants to know is that he is hoping to learn whether or not he took advantage of the space that he got in the opening, and if there was something uh, special that Black could do to kind of get back into the game. So basically, what happens in this game is Scott gets pretty impressive space advantage, and then I would say goes on to win a nice game. And the question is basically whether he could have like exploited his advantage in a better way. Okay, so let's go through it. So d4, c5, and here white plays c4. And Scott made a note about the opening. He mentions that in the past he's played like London system, but now he's mainly playing d4 and c4. But I would say already this move here in this exact position is not really the most accurate or the most ambitious for white. And we actually see the players kind of fight for the center a bit in this game, but white definitely wins the battle, and I think because of that gets pretty decisive advantage right from the get go. At this point, black plays knight c6, which is very logical, like hitting the d4 square. But I think both players are kind of missing the goal here that white sets out when they're playing d4. And the goal is very simple. White wants to take over the center. If white was given a second move, white would definitely want to play e4 here. And that's the idea. White wants to play d4 and e4 together and get a big center. And that's why the main moves for black in this position are typically d5 or knight f6. Both of these moves make it hard for white to play e4 safely, and then the battle for the center continues. White goes c4, hoping to entice black to take this pawn, so that then they can play e4, either right away or start with e3 and then eventually play for e4 in the future, depending on how aggressive they want to be. So when black goes c5, this move definitely fights for the center, and if white were to play e4 here, then black would be able to take on d4 and prevent white from getting the complete pawn center. Of course, this is a very well-known position. Smith-Morra players are going to be really happy with this one. Actually, we have a Smith-Morra game that we'll be looking at later as well. But this is totally acceptable for black, of course, because black is not allowing white to just capture the whole center. And so if white wants to win the battle for the center in this position, they need to go d5. They need to push forward. We basically need to prevent black from being able to take this one. And once white plays d5, white will be able, pretty much in most cases, to follow up with e4. Like if knight f6, white can either play the immediate knight c3 and then play e4, or white could even start with c4, as many players would rather do, and then play knight c3 and eventually play e4. And this is, of course, a very playable position for black. This is known as the Benoni structure, but it has some very significant drawbacks to this position from black's point of view, and that's mainly the space disadvantage. Hey, we're getting a raid from Angelica Chessborn. Thank you very much. Welcome, welcome. We are in the middle of some Dojo game analysis, so I'm just going to keep powering through. So basically, this is still a very playable position that even though black has given up a lot of space in this Benoni, black is still going to be able to fight for the center. Black can develop the bishop to g7 and eventually play a very, very important move, e6. And e6 is what allows black to fight for the center and eventually try to create some counterplay. And if you do end up playing a Benoni position, it's very important that you try to get this e6 move in, because this is what gives black's pieces some squares and some activity, and actually some targets, can put the rook on the e-file and so on. So when white goes c4 in this position, I think this is a big no-no for d4 players, because we're allowing black to just take on d4 and get rid of one of our central pawns and trade it off for the c-pawn. And by doing this, black could be doing really, really well here in terms of controlling the center. Okay, sorry, I need to take a timeout here. There we go. Okay, yeah, please don't spam the chat with stuff. Thank you. All right. So Black definitely needed to take this one, and well, white would have to recapture. Black will go knight c6, get this nice tempo. White has to move the queen early on, and it's already kind of ideal. We generally don't want to be wasting a lot of moves in the opening with the queen, and here black can just simply start getting the pieces out, knight f6, e6, d5, and so on, and have a perfectly reasonable position. All the pieces are coming out, fighting for the center, and getting a good opening. So in the game, black goes knight c6, and now Scott does push d5, which is absolutely correct, and this is the problem with the move knight c6 here, is that after d5, black doesn't really have a great square for the knight. Knight d4 is just going to keep getting kicked around with e3, knight e5 will eventually probably get kicked with f4, so the knight doesn't seem particularly stable here. And otherwise, either the knight is going back to b8 or going to a5 on the edge of the board. So black chooses knight a5. I think at this point, it's probably one of the better options for the knight. Knight b4 gets hit with a3, but the real mistake was the move knight to c6. The knight should not be coming out when white can just kick it, and it doesn't have a great square. And so, yeah, with knight a5, the knight is on the side of the board. Now white plays e4 and completely takes over the center, and I think already has like a nearly decisive strategic advantage. Really, really huge for white. So now black goes b6, which I kind of understand, securing the knight and maybe giving the knight a chance to go back and get back into the game with knight to b7. I definitely don't mind this move from black's point of view, but definitely at some point black is really going to have to play this move e6 and try to at least challenge white's space advantage. And that's kind of what happens in this game, is that black never really challenges it too much and basically gets rolled over. But even here, I think there's a number of instructive moments. Like right here, white plays a4, and Scott writes that a4 is intended to stop b5. But in fact, I would say this move is totally unnecessary. Number one, I think the reason isn't fully logical. Like if black could play b5, they would have played it on the last move. So if black is pushing b6 here, they're not really threatening to play b5 anytime soon. Maybe they'll play a6, and I would say at least wait for black to play a6 before playing a4. But even then, we might not need to. The c-pawn might be covering this square already enough times. So definitely white should just play knight c3 and just start getting the pieces out. Knight c3, knight f3, bishop d3, castles. This would be kind of like normal development. Rook can come to e1. Eventually we develop the bishop, and so on. Question from the chat: is e5 a good idea? I would say there's no real reason to play e5 in the position if it's not attacking knight on f6, which we will see in the game. Black plays knight f6, I think actually right here. And once knight f6 is played, now e5 is a lot more tempting because it comes with tempo. Without the tempo, then I think there's no real need. Like black will be able to still challenge our center, and I'd rather use this time to develop. I think developing is still more important, and yeah, we don't want to just be pushing too many pawns because we definitely do run the risk of overextending. So a4, and what we'll also see later on actually is that white has completely weakened this b3 square. So it's not just that this tempo could have been used better elsewhere, like with knight c3, but also this square is now weak, and if white's queen ever leaves d1, then black's knight has a chance to just be a hero and play knight b3 and trade itself off, or even deliver a winning fork if white is not careful. So now this square is like a chronic weakness that white has to kind of keep track of, and it's not really ideal. So knight f6 is played, bishop d3. Bishop d3 is totally fine. I also don't see a reason why white shouldn't have just played e5 here, because black's other knight on f6, again, doesn't have a great square. If knight e4, then like bishop d3, for example, and the knight is in big trouble, or queen f3, I think also is a very annoying move to deal with for black. So yeah, I think e5 here was totally justified, because black's knight would probably have to go back to g8, as these squares are also covered, and then white can just continue developing, and yeah, we haven't lost any time, and we just have this like commanding space advantage. So definitely e5, and from black's point of view, black needed to play like d6 here, And then e6, this move very important, just stopping e5, and then the knight can come out safely. And okay, if black can get the pieces out, it's definitely going to be a very, very playable position. Like white has a big space advantage, but it would still be up to white to kind of turn that into something, right? It doesn't just like win the game on its own. So yeah, both sides start developing here. E6 again, I think e5 definitely would be very justified with the knight having to go backwards, and then we don't have to go crazy here. Like d6 would be hanging the g2 pawn. That seems kind of unnecessary. We can just develop knight f3, and yeah, as long as white just continues to get the pieces out, should be having a big advantage. Now, white plays knight f3, bishop e7. Again, e5, absolutely called for here. e5, d6 looks really, really nice, just shutting in all of black's pieces. Here, black can play like knight g4, knight h5, but the knight isn't particularly happy on either of these squares. There's always going to be like h3, and knight on h5, I think, immediately gets trapped with g4. So yeah, still very, very difficult position for black here after something like d6. So yeah, I would say in general, we want to be careful about extending too far too quickly, but when you're advancing your pawns like with tempo and your opponent's pieces are being pushed backwards, usually that's a pretty good thing to do. And we should be brave enough to do it with the confidence that our pieces are developed to kind of support our advancing pawns. And here white is definitely, I think, in time to support everything. Bishop f4, and everything is very nicely defended. And eventually, of course, we'll have to break through, but that should be pretty straightforward, with white having still a lot of room to maneuver on the king side. Sometimes I think people feel like, okay, but the position is blocked. Like, how do you actually win? Well, you do have to break through, and generally you got to look for some pawn breaks, some way to open some lines, and get your pieces in front of the enemy king. So in this case, it would be some kind of plan of bringing the bishop to f4. Not queen d2, because again, that's like blundering knight to b3, but queen somewhere. And yeah, eventually maybe h4, knight g5, and just playing on the king side. So bishop e7, castles, castles. Now finally we do get e5, and yeah, white is absolutely crushing. Knight to e8, d6, and black goes knight takes d6, which I think actually was quite a reasonable decision, because the alternative was bishop h4, which does lose tactically. It may seem like after g3, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, that the bishop can escape, but the rook on a8 is actually hanging after all this. So black is basically losing a piece here no matter what. After bishop h4, again, g3 takes, bishop g5, white is just taking and grabbing this one. So the piece is lost either way. But with knight takes d6, at least black gets 2 pawns for the piece, and maybe one day if the pawns start, running forward in the center, maybe black can get some compensation. But of course, it's pretty much kind of hopeless either way. But at least a good practical decision. I think this move objectively definitely much better than just trying to save the bishop with bishop h4. But it's still bad. Now white finds bishop takes h7. Very nice move. And it's not even a, let's say, Greek gift sacrifice, because at any point white can just regain the piece. So this is just a tactic to win another pawn. King h8. Now black could have taken the bishop, but after knight g5 check, of course, it's very scary. If black goes back king g8, then queen h5, and black is just probably immediately getting mated here. And then after king g6, I think white maybe doesn't even have to play for the mate. Maybe should just take the bishop. And yeah, white keeps their extra piece. And of course, black's king is running around on g6. Well, either way, at this point, it's just very, very nice for white. So king h8, bishop drops back to e4, knight c6, and white picks up that bishop on d6, and it's basically game over. Now, Scott had some questions about the technique here, and I wanted to make a quick note on the rest of this game. So white goes knight g5 here. Very nice move. Just because the bishop is attacked and we're material doesn't mean we have to play like autopilot safe chess like bishop takes or bishop c2. No, we can still play for the attack and end the game tactically. So knight g5, threatening mate in 2 with queen h4 and queen h7. Black played g6, and here white trades and develops with bishop f4. And at this point, this is absolutely fine. White could have given some checks here, and I was looking at this one a little bit. And there's no immediate mate, but definitely the position has to be totally winning for white. So I would say you could still go for something like this, even if you didn't 100% see how you're going to checkmate the king. And the point would be to believe in the power of your pieces, knowing that once you get to this position, you'll be able to find something to do or to capture. When in doubt, I would say develop. So a move like bishop f4 here definitely comes to mind. And of course, it allows black to take on e4, but we get the knight in with check. And with such a king, generally, so many pieces being around it usually leads to mates. King f5, there's also knight d6 check. But the point here is not that you need to calculate all this or see all this ahead of time. There's probably some checkmate here as well, like g3 and queen h3. The point is that when your pieces are so extremely active and the king is going for a walk, generally you should be able to believe that, yeah, there should be something. There should be some way to win the game. And once you get here, then you'll be able to figure it out because you have a lot of pieces and you know how to look for tactics and how to try to checkmate the enemy king, right? You got to figure out where can you check the king from, what are its escape squares. Move like knight f3 comes to mind, threatening bishop g5 mate. And yeah, just have to believe in your attacking skills that you'll be able to finish it off. But I don't think it's a huge deal because Scott is able to end the game very cleanly without allowing any counterplay. So bishop f4, king g7, bishop e5, takes, knight f3, and yeah, black's one hope in the position is now totally shut down, and basically game over. Paul says, I'm never trying a Greek gift sack again, because the 2 times he tried it blew up in his face. I mean, it doesn't work in every position. You have to be very careful, of course, because it's a piece sacrifice like any other, right? So if it doesn't work out, then you're just down a piece. But it is an idea that comes up, and it does work in a lot of positions as well. So it's important to be on the lookout. Like here, it was 100% working. There wasn't even any kind of risk to it, right? Because white was just winning this bishop on d6. But anyway, thanks Scott for submitting the game. I think the main lessons from this one were really just about this kind of fight for the center and how important it is for both sides to just be trying to take as much control over the center as they can. And yeah, after black's opening, it was very hard to come back. And I mean it. After, like, you know, once white goes e5 and d6, it's basically already game over. Last chance for black, you know, of course, before e5 was played, would be to either play d6 once again and prevent white from taking so much space, or to first take on d5 and then play d6 here. Actually, as a quick point, I didn't really mention this one. A lot of players would go c takes d5 in this position and just trying to keep 2 pawns in the center, which I think is perfectly logical, and white definitely has a very nice position here and a big advantage. But there is something also to be said about taking e takes d5 as well. And it's not often clear when it's good to go e takes d5, because this one looks a little bit like anti-positional, right? Like we're capturing away from the center. But it makes a lot of sense when specifically like the enemy's pieces are on the queen side and very restricted, because this keeps both of black's pieces kind of really blocked in. Whereas when white goes cd5, then it gives black chances to play c4 and at least create some more squares for the pieces. Although here it's still very bad for black, but I think that's just kind of a useful thing to know in general, that e takes d5 can be very good, especially against this like bishop on b7, because it just feels, or starts to feel, like a totally useful piece. useless piece. And then white, again, just builds up in the center. Rook e1, queen c2, bishop f4, doubling on the e-file, and just has massive, massive pressure. Okay, I think that's going to do it for this game. Let me get the next one ready here. But if you guys have any questions on the game, I'm happy to respond. So next game was submitted by Dean G, who I always forget his OTB rating, but I know he's about 1700 online, I think on Lichess. And his opponent is 1550 rated USCF player, because this was an OTB game played at the Mechanics Chess Club over here in San Francisco. Time control was game in 120 minutes, so 2 hours with a 5-second delay. So full classical OTB game. And I believe actually the opponent is higher rated, because I think Dean, I'm not sure what his USCF rating is, but I think he's lower than 1500 if I remember correctly. But in any case, they're probably pretty close overall. Okay, so this game starts off with e4, c5, d4, and yeah, white plays the Smith-Morra gambit with c3. Now, personally, as black, I've always liked the move knight f6 in this position, because this basically forces a transposition into the c3 Sicilian after e5, knight d5, and c takes d4. And I'm already happy to play this position as black. If white were to start with this move order, then I would play knight f6, e5, knight d5, and generally white goes d4 here, takes, cd, and we get the same exact position. So I'm already happy to play this position, and it's part of my repertoire, so I just feel like against the Smith-Morra, there's no real reason to accept and allow the gambit, which I think is fully playable, and in general, if someone is playing the Smith-Morra, it means they want to be playing the Smith-Morra, and they like these kinds of positions, and they like, you know, sacrificing the pawn and playing for the attack. And so it very much never made sense to me to give the opponent kind of like the exact position that, you know, they really like and have been studying for a while, unless it's absolutely, you know, critical. But in this case, I just feel like it's a much easier choice in general just to play knight f6 and just avoid the line altogether, and then we're just playing a c3 Sicilian, which, yeah, I'm happy to play. But in any case, objectively, I don't think there's anything wrong with accepting the gambit. And for the players that do play d5 against the c3 Sicilian, for them it's not as easy, because after takes, and d4, you're not really supposed to take on d4 too quickly in this position as black, because that allows white's knight to develop to c3, and white kind of gets a better version of this position. So yeah, if that's part of your repertoire and your opponent is playing Smith-Morra, then d5 here isn't as ideal, because then it's like we get back to that position where we already took on d4, and again, white has kind of a better version of things. So anyways, taking the pawn is, of course, totally fine, and I think Dean gets a pretty decent setup here. He goes for this kind of typical plan with knight g7 and knight to g6. White plays bishop g3. White's moves, I think, also were pretty natural here. Bishop e7, castles, and rook fd1. And I really like how Dean plays this first part of the game. He goes b5, bishop b3, knight a5. Also, I think a very nice move, just threatening to take the bishop and also aiming for the c4 square. Bishop c2. And this is where I think things start to kind of really go a little bit wrong for black. Because his position, I think, is quite good. He's up a pawn. White has some compensation for sure, because white has this d-file and a little bit easier development. But I think what happens is Dean just kind of ends up overestimating greatly the value of this pawn on d7. Because like first look at this position, I think a lot of players would say the most natural move in the world is bishop b7, and this would be kind of my choice. And Dean writes that this was a very natural move for him as well, but rejected it because of kind of white's potential pressure on the d-file. And let's go down the line that Dean kind of suggests here. So he writes about bishop b7 and didn't like kind of what would happen here. Queen d3, bishop c6, and knight to d4. So this is what Dean didn't like because, white is trying to take on a c6 and then looking at the d7 pawn. But as Dean notes in his writing, this line is kind of wildly wrong according to the engine. So yeah, engine loves this position for black, mainly because I think black just has a lot of activity, especially connected with this play on the queen side. There's like knight c4, there's bishop f6 ideas, and rook to c8. And so yeah, the engine just doesn't care about this d7 pawn at all, just suggests rook c8, which also looks very, very natural. Now, I think black can definitely consider going this one and just trying to keep the extra pawn. But it is kind of interesting that rook takes c6 is probably just stronger, with the idea after queen takes d7 to either go for a bishop f6 kind of play, like something like this. And although it looks kind of equal, the reality is black actually just has a ton of pressure on white's queen side, like bishop f6, b4, knight c4. So this is just very, very good for black, despite it being equal material. Or black can just play queen b6, and now white has all the same issues to worry about, plus rook d8 is actually a pretty annoying threat as well. And this idea actually of sacrificing the d-pawn and then specifically just moving your queen out of the way actually comes up a lot in the King's Indian. Surprisingly enough, if I can maybe try to quickly drum up a position where this might happen. But yeah, black is often very willing to part ways with the d6 pawn if it means that they're getting active play against white's queen. Let's say, for example, white plays like f3, the Samish variation, bishop e3, let's say c5, d5, and we'll play a6 here for black. White goes queen d2, and let's say here black plays e6. So this is kind of like typical play, and we have a Benoni structure again. We talked about the Benoni in the previous game, where black plays e6 and tries to take on d5. And some players often have the question well, what if white takes on e6, bishop takes e6, and they castle here, for example, and they try to take the d6 pawn. Well, this is a position where I think black would just welcome white to do this and just happily play either knight c6 here, takes, and then try to get the queen out, or maybe even queen c8, because there's c5 that's also hanging, and I think black is willing to give this one up. Or black could consider just knight d7, queen takes d6, and then black is just very, very happy to play this position, because white's king on c1 is going to be in a ton of danger, and black can, I'm pretty sure, just continue here b5 or queen a5, rook fd8, and just have a ton of options and a ton of play against white's position. So this is one that, okay, I think if you're not a King's Indian player, would not be super, super natural to you, but to me it felt very, very similar. And there's a lot of these positions where you can just give the d6 pawn, but get a ton of play in return, and in general we're very happy. Now in the game, it's important to note, this is a pawn that we're giving back. And I should say, as a general strategy, when you're playing against any kind of gambit and you're a pawn up, if you have a chance to give the pawn back but get some nice activity or some positional pressure, I would say a lot of times it's a very practical choice to do so, rather than being the one that's kind of on the receiving end of white building up and trying to break through, and you're just desperately trying to hold on to your extra pawn. You'll find that a lot of strong players feel much more comfortable just giving the pawn back, but getting some nice play for their pieces, and then just trying to win the game that way. So yeah, definitely I think Dean underestimates his chances in this position, because it's just actually a very nice Sicilian with lots of great play on the queen side here. And this leads him to play queen b6 in this position and just kind of go down a really wrong path, because now white plays e5, finally just fixing the d6 square and playing for this plan, knight e4, knight d6. And black goes rook to d8, but this is very, very slow just to get the bishop to b7, which could have gone there a couple moves ago. Question from the chat about d6. Yeah, I think d6 is possible, but then you always have to be careful about ideas like e5, or even stuff like takes, and then e5 might be a problem. You have to make sure this works out tactically for black, because there is a lot of pressure on the d file, and yeah, I would be really I'd be pretty worried about something like this. Even like knight b7, we can like defend the bishop, but like takes, and then we're still pinned up, and knight e4 and stuff. I would think that this is looking really, really scary. So that would be kind of the issue with d6. But the basic point is that black should just forget about this d pawn, and just get the pieces out, get the rook to the c file, and there will be enough play to at least equalize, but probably have the advantage. So queen b6, e5, rook d8, knight e4, bishop b7, knight d6, and yeah, this knight comes in and is a very, very annoying piece. It was possible to take this knight, and this comes up later, where black could have done this. And it looks quite unpleasant to allow the rook into d6, but the point is that, okay, bishop c6 here, or queen c5, and eventually black will kind of be able to fight for the square with knight c4 or knight to b7. So it's not like white just kind of dominates the square for the rest of the game. It's actually just kind of like a temporary thing. The other thing that's going on in this position that I think Dean doesn't really appreciate during the game, but really, really important to point out, is that in this structure, both of these pieces from white are really, really bad pieces. I mean, really just doing nothing. The bishop is firing into its own pawn, and the knight is also just firing into its own pawn. And these two pieces are tasked with defending a pawn that is not hardly under attack. So strategically, it looks like white is doing really, really well, but actually, like, I'm not sure. Like, if white doesn't generate some attacking chances on the queen side quickly, these pieces are basically shut out of the game. Like, they're shut out of the queen side, where there could be a big battle taking place. If you guys are familiar with the famous game Winter versus Capablanca, where white gets this bishop on g3 kind of like trapped against the pawn chain, and then Capablanca just opens the queen side and wins the game easily with his extra bishop over there. To me, it's kind of like a very similar type of concept where, yeah, I think maybe neither player fully appreciated that these pieces are potentially very, very bad. So bishop d5, bishop e4, takes, and now rook a7. And once again, I think Dean rejects the right approach due to like a kind of underestimation of his chances. So right move, of course, was like knight c4, and I think this is a very instinctual move for a lot of players, because you have to challenge this knight on d6. Also, black, I think, could definitely consider taking this one. Because again, after rook takes d6, eventually this knight will come to c4, or black can even play like queen b7 here, and then either take back with the knight or knight c4, and we'll kick the rook out of d6, and eventually all that's going to be left is, again, white's kind of problematic pieces like this bishop and knight. So this was very playable, but I think even more natural because, okay, maybe we don't want to give up the dark square bishop, be knight c4. And I think Dean rejects this one because after takes, queen takes b2, yeah, he writes that, okay, felt like the queen was vulnerable, and again, white is going to be maybe putting some pressure on the d file at some point. But again, this d pawn actually is very inconsequential to the position, and what really matters is that, again, white's pieces on the king side are really not great. Now, the knight on g6 we can't say is like such a phenomenal piece either. It's not really doing a whole lot, but the bishop on e7 is certainly going to be contributing to the battle for the queen side. And so if anyone is better here, it's definitely black. Still, okay, extra pawn. White has to put in some work here to possibly win it back, and that's certainly not guaranteed. But also just better pieces, like more control over the queen side. So I wouldn't go so far to say like, oh, black is winning here, but definitely very, very clear advantage. So yeah, this seems like kind of the critical like misevaluation maybe that Dean was making during the game, which is why I think this was a super instructive game to submit, and I'm really happy that this one was thrown in, because I could see a lot of players making very similar mistakes to Dean, and I'm sure I've had games myself like this where you just put all this pressure or all this effort into like defending this like one pawn where you're not really fixing the critical problems in the position, which is this knight on d6 is an extremely dangerous piece for as long as it's allowed to live. Kasparov famously noted that knights on the 6th rank are octopuses, because they control 8 squares in the position that are usually like pretty important squares. It's not like the knight is on the side of the board. It's like controlling, attacking 8 squares that all like, there's stuff that could be happening on like all 8 squares are important. So this knight is super strong. Like it's worth more than 3 points. Maybe that's another way to think about it, right? Rather than trying to defend this pawn that's only worth 1 point, how about we try to deal with the knight that's worth like 5 or 6 points right now? It's like this super powerful piece. So yeah. Now, okay, the idea of rook a7 is to go knight b7, which fair enough, trying to deal with the knight. But of course, black, time is of the essence here. Needed to just immediately play knight c4. Or bishop takes d6, I think was also very playable. But I can understand not really liking the looks of this one. It should be noted that ed6 is also would be an option here for white, but then at least, okay, now we definitely don't have to worry about the d-pawn ever again, and we can just focus on activating our rooks on the c-file, and yeah, white's pieces still aren't particularly amazing here. So in the game we get rook a7, knight h4, and okay, white tries to trade off some of their bad pieces, which I think makes a lot of sense. Takes, queen takes, and now we play knight c6 here, but okay, this was absolutely the last chance, I think, to try to trade it off with like knight c4. And I think black is still okay here, because even if white somehow wins the pawn back, we don't have to deal with this knight on d6 anymore. And so yeah, I think black is at least fine here, because yeah, this pawn is going to be weak and this one will be weak as well. But instead we get knight c6, rook ac1, and knight takes e5. And Dean writes that this is the game-losing blunder because white gets knight c8, and fair enough, white wins the exchange and with it pretty much wins the game. But I don't think this was really why black ended up losing the game. Now the engine gives rook f8 as kind of like an only move, and Dean says, okay, this is what I should have played, preventing any shenanigans and just staying solid. And okay, to give to fight back a little bit with Dean's annotations here, I think this is like a typical annotation when like, the engine points out some move and then we kind of justify it with some relatively vague comment like, okay, we just had to stay solid here, because rook f8 is not like a super natural move, I think, for anyone. It's just a very difficult position here, and I can guarantee you I probably, like, this would not be the first move that comes to mind for me in this position. So I think it was the mistakes that black made that led up to this point that kind of lead to the blunder, but it's not just because of this move that we end up losing the game. This position is already just very difficult, and yeah, maybe an engine can hold it with only moves, but this is a task that's very difficult for pretty much all humans. So yeah, after this one, knight c8, yeah, it is pretty bad. Black goes knight g6, which I think was needed, hitting the queen, which is kind of an important point, yeah, because the queen is targeting this one. White played queen g3, queen b7, takes, and yeah, no, I think white gets a pretty much decisive position, so I think it was correct for white to take the exchange here. And yeah, especially after after rook takes d7 here. Getting this pawn. If black had a chance to play d5, then okay, definitely some compensation, but no. White just takes this one. And, you know, there was one moment at the end here I felt like, okay, we played queen takes a2. I mean, maybe time pressure was a factor here. I'm not really sure. But um, I think, yeah, actually we kind of lose the game a little bit too easily here, because after queen a2, rook d8, and queen d is just game over on the spot. But I felt like we could have put up a little bit more resistance here. You know, like at least play h6. And okay, it's definitely a losing position, but it's not like that trivial for white by any means. I think white has to make a number of good moves from here to still win the game. So we definitely could have put up some stiffer resistance. And you never know, like people get nervous, you know, playing against the knight. Sometimes they blunder something, or they're worried they're going to blunder a fork. They make a bad move. Like sometimes black actually saves this one. You know, even in games between like relatively, you know, much higher rated players. Okay, for example, white could go check. I was thinking here, rook takes f7, then black takes on a2. And here if white plays like, you know, something like this, at least we're in time. You know, queen takes b2. And we're still kind of in the game here as black, although it's, you know, not a great position, obviously, but you never know. White blunders some perpetual. Definitely some more work white would have to do here for sure. So a bit of definitely not the most stubborn defense at the end, but okay, I think the main points in this game were really about just kind of hyper focusing on this d pawn and just not fully valuing, you know, how good it would be to just activate the pieces. So, but yeah, thanks Dean for submitting the game. I think really interesting one, and yeah, hopefully people got something out of that. Okay, I'm gonna go on to the next game. Hello everyone. We are just in the middle of some game analysis with games submitted via our Patreon page. We encourage folks to annotate their classical games, and then we give them some feedback, not just on the game itself, but sometimes also on the annotations. And actually, I had some notes for Ethan here playing white on his annotations that I definitely want to get to. Okay, so this was time control of 50 minutes per side plus 5 seconds. I think this was an online classical game. And yeah, starts out e4, e5, bishop c4, knight f6, d4. And yeah, I think this is known as the Yurosov gambit. E takes d4, knight f3. And yeah, by transposition, we get kind of this position. Or you could have gotten this one, I guess, from the Petrov as well, possibly. But yeah, black goes knight takes e4, queen takes d4, black goes back knight f6, and white plays bishop g5. And this is kind of like white's idea in this position, to play like knight c3, castle queenside, rook he1, and just get like a very active position right from the start. Now I think white here made a note about the move order, with knight c3 being noted as being more accurate. And yeah, this one I think is correct. I actually don't know any theory here, so I had to look at the database. But right, on bishop g5, black can throw in this like very annoying queen e7 check before doing anything else, and then developing with like knight to c6 and stuff. And this one's actually pretty annoying for white, because you don't really want to move your king, and okay, maybe you can try like king d1 and rook e1, but still like, okay, black will deal with this threat, and then your king is on d1, right? And how are you going to get your a rook into the game? So that's kind of an important nuance, that white starts with knight c3 here to get the best kind of possible setup, because queen e7 check, bishop e3 now doesn't really have much of a point for black, because white is anyway developing, and now when the rook gets to the e file, that's going to be pretty annoying for the queen on e7. So that's kind of interesting detail just to keep in mind. But we essentially end up getting the same position because black goes knight c6, queen h4, bishop e7, knight c3. And this is kind of a typical position, I guess, for this gambit, whether white starts with knight c3 or bishop g5. And yeah, white ends up getting a very, very harmonious setup here with castle's queenside. And position looks quite nice. So bishop e6, and here white plays bishop d3, avoiding the trade. White also notes that maybe rook h e1 was better, because he ends up, after bishop d3, just playing bishop b5 and losing some time in the game. And yeah, this one definitely makes sense. Now, of course, this allows black to trade off on c4, and probably black has to. But there were still quite a few games here, and it seems like white has some very reasonable compensation. For example, after black, let's say, castles here, I saw there was lots of games where white is playing h4, some games where white is like taking and then going knight d5, and then just playing like h4, g4, king b1 somewhere, g5, and just having a very nice play on the king side and in the center. And okay, black is still a pawn up, but yeah, it's not like super felt for the moment, and not really easy for black to use their pawn, right? Because if like knight e5 or something, then it seems like white can like just take this one and take on c7, something like this, right? So it's kind of hard for black to untangle here. And this knight on d5 is pretty annoying. So that seems to be where the theory is kind of at in this line, and it's seems like a very interesting position. In any case, we get bishop d3, black goes h6, rook he1, absolutely correct. White doesn't have to react because the rook on h8 is hanging, and so it's better to keep the bishop active on g5. Black goes queen d7, and now white hits him with bishop b5. And yeah, still pretty annoying for black with this pin on c6, and now white in the game plays knight e5, and now looks like kind of an annoying threat, just using all the pins. We actually get a very interesting moment here. So black goes a6, and now white plays knight e5, which looks like a wild move, but makes a lot of sense, because if white doesn't do this one right now, well, after bishop a4, black can play b5 possibly, and white will never get another chance. So he goes for it with knight e5, and I mean, it looks super tough, like what to do for black. In the game, black ends up taking and giving the queen. Because, okay, knight is also pinned, and if the queen moves away, then white is taking on c6. Maybe with the knight, maybe with the bishop. Both look like bishop takes looks very simple. White wins a pawn, and then this one is under attack. And white just wants to take here and then take on f6, and black's king is just going to be totally busted in the center. Or white can take on c6 right away, and if takes, bishop takes, and at least winning the rook. Or if a b5, then again, white takes on e7 and can go knight d5 check here using both pins, or take first and then go knight d5 check followed by taking on f6, and black's position is just completely falling apart. White is totally winning. So yeah, really tough position for black, and yeah, black here is just unable to find the only defense. Now, for me, okay, I read through Ethan's notes, and he kind of shows what Stockfish finds. To me, this looks like a really difficult position, and I'm not sure I would come up with the right move here myself. But yeah, Intiwapa writes, okay, top choice of Stockfish here was knight to d5, and the point that black had to kind of notice here to spot is that there is a potential source of counterplay with bishop takes g5. So after this move, knight d5, black is turning to take here and also win white's queen. But this move, of course, very difficult to find. And it's not surprising that in the game, black missed it and just took here and tried to defend that position, sacrificing the queen. Yeah, let me make a couple notes here. So in in the notes, Ethan writes that knight d5, like this is Stockfish's choice. And then he kind of shares the point that it's like, okay, hitting this one, and if bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, hits white's queen. And this doesn't give white any time, right, to like take on c6 or take on d5. And when white takes on e7, then black is able to recapture with this knight, and everything is now defended on c6. So white can take on c6, but then black just takes back. White can take again, black recaptures. And after all is said and done, black is left with a nice extra pawn and very nice advantage. Yeah, Ethan also notes that there was this move, knight to g4, which is apparently the second best engine move, and then gives some lines here as well. With takes here, and oh no, excuse me, this one I gave. So one thing I gotta note here, like the annotation submitted is just like a lines, right? It's just like, oh, here's what the engine gives, but the notes didn't even have like evaluations. So it's just like a bunch of moves, like knight d5, takes, and then it ends here without like any note. I had to go in and like analyze it myself and okay, turn on the engine and see like what the evaluation is. So my note here is like, if you are going to use the engine to help annotate your games, make sure you actually include like what it's saying, like what's the eval, right? Don't just like throw in like these are the engine moves, because then you're not really going to learn a whole lot from all that. You really have to dig deep and like try to understand like what the engine is calculating, because it's not as simple as like, oh, knight d5 was the move and black should have found it and that's it, right? It's more like you got to try to understand like why this move is working and how maybe it would be possible to find it. So yeah, I would really advise you guys to kind of like spend a little bit more time when you're analyzing and really try to get into the nitty gritty. So for example, this move knight g4 is also given as the engine. And it's easy to just see like, okay, engine gives black is slightly better. I guess everything is okay. But you have to actually try to analyze it. So for example, let's say white plays bishop takes e7 here. If black takes back, queen takes e7, well then white is taking on c6, taking on e7, taking on g4, and actually white is just up a piece. White is winning. So how does this line actually work for black? Well, if you run it through the engine after bishop takes e7, the idea is that black plays knight g takes e5. So not taking just completely ignoring the bishop on e7, taking this knight on e5, and it kind of makes sense once you see it, because this bishop on e7 actually now doesn't really have a lot to do, and it's kind of an awkward piece. And it turns out that here black is doing fine. And like if rook takes e5, then I think it's like queen takes e7 or something. So it's actually really, really tricky for black to find all the right moves in the position. So this is the danger when analyzing with the engine, is that it might give you the impression that like, oh, everything is so simple. This move knight g4 would have saved the game because black is hitting this one, or this move knight d5, this would have saved the game, but it's really not easy to figure all this stuff out, over the board. And so my advice would be to really like go through it, like very, very carefully go through the lines and really try to understand like, okay, why is this move working? What happens after knight takes d7 here, bishop takes g5, takes, really play through the line out and really like try to understand like what is going on here, right? It's like still looks like a totally crazy position. White can take this one, but then black recaptures, and white can take this one, but then maybe black takes with the pawn and the knight is trapped, right? Or if white takes here first, then what does black do? Well, then probably king takes d7, and everything is defended, and black has still kept their extra pawn. Yeah, it's really not easy to find this move for black. Number one, you have to notice that this is a possible source of counterplay, because of course when the queen is hanging, it's not easy to consider moves that just leave your queen hanging, right? Just moving the knight somewhere. And then number two, black actually has a lot of options once you notice that this bishop takes g5 trick is possible. So I was thinking about this position, and I was thinking, okay, if I notice this one, then I would definitely be considering knight h7 here for black, and knight g8, and this kind of move, and maybe knight g4, and maybe knight d5. But yeah, it would be really, really hard decision and very difficult task to figure out. Anyway, long story short is, when you have like a crazy position, I'm totally cool with using the engine to kind of help you figure things out, but put it down on paper, like really write down like what the engine found and what are the conclusions and what's the eval at the end of the line, and really try to get something out of it. If you just play through the engine line, you're probably not going to get a whole lot out of it if you don't actually try to put it into your own words. So that's a very, very important part of the process. Okay, so yeah, game continues. So black goes d takes e5, and white takes the queen. Knight takes d7. Now bishop on g5 is hanging, so bishop takes e7. And here, if black just takes back, well then okay, white has queen for rook and piece and has big advantage here. Can go bishop c4, bishop takes d7, etc. So instead, black tried a takes b5, but now white has knight takes b5 and is hitting c7. So black is not in time to take back on e7. Instead, f6 is played, bishop a3, and now white has definitely consolidated the advantage, yeah, goes on to win, I think, pretty nice game. Because again, now it's queen versus rook and knight, which is just not enough material for black, and also white's pieces are nicely active. So black tried queenside castles, but now queen a4, very nice switch, activating the queen on the a file. Knight b6, knight a7 check. White trades this one off, knight d7, and now white starts kind of maneuvering everything towards the attack. Rook d1, bishop c5, threatening this one and this one. Bishop g4 is played, rook d4, b6, and a nice finish here with queen a6 check first, forcing black's king to b8, and now rook a4, and yeah, black is just getting mated here, c6, bishop d6. So really very nice game by NT Wapo, definitely well played. And, the notes, they kind of criticize themselves for missing, that on knight e5, black could play knight d5. But really it's like, wasn't that easy and not an easy move to find at all for black, this knight d5 or this knight g4. So I don't know if this really deserved a lot of criticism. It's like, we have to remember, just because the engine finds something and just spits it out right away doesn't mean that it's actually like easy to understand or to find on your own. So yeah, you got to keep in mind that the game is played between two humans, and yeah, sometimes your ideas will be refuted by the engine, but the engine is a supercomputer, right? I mean, it's like, if there's some crazy line, it doesn't matter how hard it is, the engine, will find it, right? Whereas a lot of times you can play really well and put pressure, and yeah, the opponent doesn't defend in the best way because the opponent is human. That's chess. Yeah, Flexo, this was a classical game. Yeah, 50 plus 5, I think, was the full time control. But overall, very, very interesting game. I think hopefully some useful lessons there and some takeaways. And yeah, the big one is like the engine can be super, super helpful, but really try to extract the most value from it. And I think it's totally fine to use the engine to kind of help your analysis, especially like NT Wapo wrote, like he didn't find the defense during the game, he didn't really find the defense after the game, so he checked with the engine and wanted to see what it says, and I think that's totally fine. But then you really want to like go through and see exactly like how it works, what the lines are like, what variations it's calculating, and really try to understand for yourself. Okay, that's going to do it for this game. We've got one more game today, which was another really interesting one. Okay, so next game was submitted by Sriracha here, playing white, and this was 60 plus 30, classical game, I think on chess.com. And yeah, this one was a familiar opening for me because we get H3 Najdorf. And this is the one I recommended in my book on the Sicilian. And I had a couple of games in it as well, but yeah, spent a lot of time kind of um, analyzing these positions. And I've always felt this was a very kind of nice and flexible choice for white against the Najdorf, where it's like you don't have a ton of like super sharp forcing lines that you have to kind of know, and you can also play the position in different ways. General idea is to just push g4 and then get a better version both of, or try to get a version, I should say, of the Keres attack with g5 and h4, but also a better version of the fianchetto variation, where when white plays like g3 and the Najdorf and bishop g2, this is also very playable. A typical plan here is to then build up with h3 and g4 in the future anyway. So I've always liked this move, again, intending to go g4 against most things. And in this game, we get one of the, I think, most solid lines that black has always had, knight to e2. The idea now is to put the knight on g3 eventually, and h5. And yeah, this is definitely like not a move that I think comes naturally to most players, but it is a very, very theoretical move, and it's been played by pretty much all the top Najdorf players in the world. So nowadays people play this one at all levels. It's kind of like a known thing. I think like the chess understanding is slowly adjusting, and now people realize, yeah, this move is actually totally playable. Although this has been known, I should say, for like over 10 years now, that this is quite a nice move for black in this position. Now the idea is pretty straightforward, just stopping white from pushing g4. And there's different ways white has tried to kind of deal with this one, like g3 has definitely been a move here, and just kind of adjusting, like, okay, putting the bishop on g2 and arguing that the h5 pawn is kind of weak, but in general I think black has always been kind of okay here. So the typical main line has always been bishop g5, taking advantage of the fact that black gave up this square. One line that I don't know objectively how good it is, but it does have some really strong players playing it, is this move knight g1 here, which I think is very, very funny. But it is quite logical because now that black is committed to h5, the knight uses the f3 square and then can jump to g5 as well. So this might be something kind of worth looking into because it definitely would have some nice surprise value. But yeah, bishop g5 has long been considered the main move. And now we get a type of like almost Sveshnikov kind of position where white takes on f6, queen takes f6, knight d5. Black has nothing better than to go queen d8 because taking on d5 kind of leaves black slightly worse in the opposite color bishop middle game. So queen d8, knight ec3. And yeah, since the book was written, back then this was just kind of the only move that people played in the position. No one really gave it second thought. But in the years since the book was made, queen d3 became really popular in this position. Mainly thanks, I think, to Vishy Anand, who is a big h3 Najdorf player, and he had a bunch of games here, I think, against like Nepo and MVL and like all the top Najdorf guys, and he won some really, really nice games. Now I remember checking this one a couple years ago because I was like following up on the theory from the book, and yeah, I really like never fully understood it. Like it was never that liked by the engine. It wasn't like the top line. And yeah, I never quite got like the full idea behind what white setup, but Vishy did really well with it. And nowadays I think it's kind of overtaken as the main move. Now the straightforward idea is that white is just trying to castle queenside and then eventually build up a setup of like this knight to c3, this knight to e3, bringing the other knight to d5, and then maybe pushing c3, also looking to maybe play g4 once black castles. So basically taking the game into a position with opposite sides castling. And it feels very risky, or it always felt very risky to me because we don't have a dark squared bishop. But well, white plays king b1 typically and gets off the diagonal, and for the most part, this usually stays blocked. And nowadays, yeah, there's still a lot of games like knight c5. Vichy used to play like queen f3 here, I think, all the time, and then play for g4. Lately, I noticed Jan Christoph Duda had some games with queen a3, which probably has its concrete points behind it as well. So this one definitely is probably worth exploring, because what I saw is that white is actually scoring really, really well in this position. I just haven't fully taken the time to really, really understand, again, the danger of white's setup and why white is scoring so well. But yeah, the results actually have been very, very nice. So this is definitely something worth looking into a lot further. But yeah, so knight e3. Okay, this was the main move for many years. That still gets played, I think, quite often. And I think it's, okay, a much more straightforward move. And here the idea is for white to simply play for like a dominance of the d5 square. So the bishop comes back to b3, the queen lands somewhere either like d3 or e2, white castles, and eventually brings like the rooks to the center. And yeah, thinking about the plans long term, white is essentially just trying to trade minor pieces, especially trying to trade off the light squared bishop, and leave themselves with just a good knight against the bad dark squared bishop. Sorry, this is a lot of arrows, but basically bishop c4, bishop b3, and eventually trying to prep knight e3. And yeah, there's different like ways and move orders of doing it, but that's kind of the general strategic idea. And in the meantime, black goes g6 and develops the bishop and often plays for f5. Kind of like in the Sveshnikov, and tries to get this counterplay. So very, very double-edged. Not double-edged like it's sharp, but strategically I would say double-edged position. So yeah, queen f3 here is played by Sriracha, and then castles queenside. And this one actually ends up being not so great. So bishop c4, like I mentioned, is kind of the main idea, and then white parks the bishop on b3, castles, develops the queen somewhere to d3 or e2, and yeah, eventually just kind of keeps building up in the center. It's a much more quiet positional game. So if you want something more chaotic, then definitely queen d3 followed by castling queenside is the way to go. Whereas this one is more, definitely a lot more positional. Okay, so we kind of mix the ideas, queen f3, bishop g7, and castle queenside. But the difference here, I guess, between this one and the queen d3 position is that we've moved the knight off of e2 very, very early, and so black's knight is just coming into d4. And black is getting a ton of counterplay. So compared to the previous line where we saw this one, generally black is going knight d7, knight c5, but if they were to play knight to c6, this would be kind of difficult because it's going to be hard for them to get knight d4 in. And at a certain point, I think white can just play c3, and then the knight will feel very restricted. So that seems to be kind of a key difference here. And okay, black ends up getting a very, very nice position. Rook g1 played, I'm not sure. I definitely don't, it's hard to come up with a different move. I mean, it's hard to suggest a better move because like you can go king b1 or move the bishop, but anyway, knight d4 is coming. So rook g1 I don't mind because at least it's kind of preparing g4 in the future, and so it has definitely some value. So knight d4, queen d3, black goes rook c8, king b1, b5, and yeah, actually this is a really interesting position for me because it looks very, very nice for black. But in a couple moves, it completely turns around. So knight e3, queen a5, white goes knight d5. And now the point is that after this nice maneuver with knight e3, knight d5, white is turning c3, and actually black's knight on d4 is in trouble. So black tries to kind of break out with f5, but it doesn't fully work out. So we'll get into these complications. Long story short, this position I think is quite nice for white. But yeah, I was wondering exactly like where black went wrong, because again, this position looks very nice, and then in a couple moves it seems like black is in big trouble. My feeling is that actually at this point, maybe instead of b5, maybe black should have taken the chance to just take on d5 here. I think black can take on d5 later, but the point of doing it in this position is that white can't really take with the knight, or at least c2 is hanging, and that doesn't look like something we want to give up. But if white goes e takes d5, then structurally this is now, I think, just fantastic for black. So eventually like f5 will come, e4, the bishop can open up, and it's like a perfect Sveshnikov where white castled queenside. And if you think about the Sveshnikov, like white like rarely castles queenside. It's like really, really rare. It has to be like, I think, a very, very specific position. So this one looks like the way to go. Yeah, it took me a while actually to figure this out. But yeah, after b5, knight e3, queen a5, knight d5. Now I think actually taking on d5 was probably the best move, but at least here after e takes d5, at least this knight is better placed, and you still have this c3 idea as white. So this, I think, is not as bad for white as before, but also what black needed to do. And yeah, then I think black could go like b4 here and stop c3. The notes mentioned f5, c3, e4, queen d2. But here at least black can still go f4 to avoid losing the knight outright. And then it's still like super unclear position. But I think white has to go knight c2, takes, queen takes, and okay, black has actually made some weaknesses. So I don't know if black is still even better here, probably not. But okay, it was still at least possible not to lose the knight. But yeah, main point I wanted to bring up actually was probably that black should have just taken on d5 right away at a moment where e takes d5 would be forced, and then I think black just gets like just an absolutely beautiful beautiful structure. Can black go king d7? I don't know. I'm very, very skeptical of any plans that are, like move the king 3 times, and that's a lot of time, right? And then the king isn't fully. It might be possible, but I would think that black is probably has better options as well. I think the king is generally going to be safer on the king side anyway. So yeah, in the game we get this with queen a5. And okay, it's also a question whether queen a5 was the most useful move as well, because after knight d5, it's not like black actually has any pressure on the a2 pawn, and maybe the queen could be better used elsewhere, like on d8 it still has access to the king side. But okay, next very interesting moment comes a bit later. So f5, c3, definitely I think this works out in white's favor. f4, takes, and queen takes e3. And yeah, fe3 kind of looks logical at first to like strengthen the center, and I think a lot of players would make this one, but no, I think queen takes e3 is definitely stronger because you hit like queen g5, and okay, I think Dan mentions queen g3 in his notes, but queen g5 also like huge turn in the position. Bishop h6, queen g3, takes, g5. And yeah, game like really turns around from here because it feels like, okay, should be good for white. Like white is way ahead in development, and we also pawn up from earlier. Black's king looks very, very open, but somehow the game turns around, and basically, like, okay, to put it simply, white just neglects development, just doesn't develop. Bishop g7, all of a sudden this position like is such a mess, and it's not even it's like, yeah, it's not even clear like who has the edge anymore. Like I have a hard time just picking a side. So what happened here? I mean, in the notes, Sriracha writes, okay, bishop e2, he should have just played. Yeah, just getting the bishop out, hitting this one. And this makes perfect sense. Just getting the pieces out so that you're always able to deal with the queenside counterplay. My first instinct was definitely bishop d3. And okay, it does a similar thing, like it targets some nice light squares, but also it's nice to cover the c2 square. I found the bishop on d3 in the Sicilian is generally just well placed because combining attack and defense. And then okay, I think black should castle, and yeah, now white can take on e5, and I think everything looks fine. And um, yeah, it's not clear what maybe black plays bishop g7. I was thinking, and if queen takes g5, we want to be careful with like rook takes f2, and we don't want to allow that counterplay. But okay, white can continue like rook e1, and I mean it's still like a tricky position. I was thinking like, yeah, if like rook f1 for example, which I thought was logical to defend this pawn, and then just try to take, then maybe black plays queen a4, and if queen takes g5, then rook takes f2 anyway. Comes in again, all of a sudden black has huge counterplay and threats of rook takes b2, queen b4 check with a perpetual or maybe more in some cases. And yeah, already super messy. But okay, maybe if white is more solid, like rook e1 here, and then rook e2, then I think the counterplay kind of does run out, and it's very hard for black, of course, as well, because bishop takes e5 is almost never going to be possible. Not only can white take on g5 with check then, but probably white just sacrifices the exchange and should be able to play for mate, something like this. And yeah, I didn't really look at this position too deeply because it just looks like white should be mating in a couple of moves. And yeah, we're down the exchange, but it's like one piece versus one piece, and this bishop is just an absolute monster. So yeah, kind of I don't know, something went wrong maybe with the instincts here for white, I think, because okay, in many cases like de5 is going to be a good move. And actually in the game after it takes castles, you can again just revert to bishop d3 and bishop e2, and you're I think in very good shape here. But yeah, we really need to focus on the development here. Oh, the instincts were right, but you overthought the position. I see that. Yeah, that's a good clarification. That happens to me a lot as well, and yeah, it's kind of a hard balance to navigate because the next time you have to be like you have to kind of trust your instincts more then. But yeah. Um, and yeah, one thing I just wanted to say, if you look at strong players and even like their blitz games, you'll see they do this kind of stuff all the time. Something you've noticed even in like opposite color bishop middle games, because okay, the principle is that these bishops always favor the attacker, which means time is very important and keeping the initiative and developing quickly is very important. And you'll see players like they'll in blitz, they'll just make these kinds of moves all the time where there might be some pawn hanging, they can take some pawn or they can defend some pawn. They don't care. They just get their pieces out to the best diagonals, and they know where the pieces need to go to be as active as possible. And this is often, I think, the thing to do, whether you're the stronger side playing for the initiative or the weaker side playing for counterplay. It's just all about putting your pieces on the most active squares you can find when there's not a lot of time in the position. Okay, uh, so sorry guys for the background noise. Actually, I don't know how much you can hear, but it's pretty loud on my end. Let's keep going. So yeah, now we start playing defense, and I know we blunder here with bishop d3, rook e5. It happens, I guess, kind of possibly a result of well, just like the previous decisions, like leading up to this moment. Wow, you guys don't hear any? That's remarkable. So yeah, and low on time. So yeah, at this point it's tough. So I don't really blame you missing this one. But b4, yeah. Okay, I should explain what's happening to everyone here. So, rook on d2 is hanging. So white kind of blundered into this because now the queen on e3 doesn't have a lot of squares. White did have a bailout that he noticed with queen f3, which probably he should have done. Queen takes d2, queen f7 check, and white can force a draw here. Neither side can really play on. Even some move like queen g6, at the minimum, black is always playing king g8 to get out, but I'm pretty sure you can also maybe look for tactics. Actually, I don't know if this one is working exactly, but something like this. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not working because white can just take and take. So yeah, I think black just goes king g8. Oh, rook e1. Yeah, thank you. Rook e1, and this one is right hanging. So at least black has a draw or more. In this case, definitely more. So yeah, probably white should just acquiesce to the perpetual here. In the game, white goes b4, which works out very fortunately after queen takes a3, bishop h7 check. Takes, and that was game over. But yeah, it wouldn't have been so crazy for black to find queen a4. Right, like it does feel quite logical. So yeah, a bit surprised black didn't see it, but okay, just blundered the check. That's very understandable. But yeah, if they found this one, this would have just been, it's just like game over. I mean, it's just so devastating for white. So my guess is we didn't see this was possible during the game. If we saw it was possible, we probably would have just gone for the draw. But yeah, ideally we would, at this level, I think we would see that this move is super dangerous and try to avoid it or not go into it. It's kind of it's understandable to miss the move, of course. I can definitely see a lot of players, including myself, missing it. But it's, I would say it's a big miss because yeah, black is just using the drawback principle, and okay, there's not a lot of squares for the queen, right? So this one is not too far-fetched to find, and of course white's queen is still hanging. So we got a little bit lucky in the game, but well, I mean, okay, for the first time playing the middle game, definitely not too bad, and a lot of very, very interesting points here. But the main thing I felt was like, you know, just this moment, like, you know, in a dynamic position, enemy king is opened up. Even if you do take the pawns, like the way you're winning this one is by getting your bishop into the game and checkmating black on the light squares. So no time to waste. We have to just like develop super, super quickly here. Because I mean, you're never worried about them taking, right? Like you're not in any way concerned about not winning this pawn at some point. So it definitely makes more sense to get the pieces out first. Alrighty, guys. Oh yeah, after bishop c2 there, the point was that black is just taking way more stuff. So it takes, and then rook takes a3, which is kind of important. And that's a huge threat, and of course the bishop is hanging. So this is, yeah, white is losing at least a piece here. Rook a2 might be like only move. But yeah, just piece down. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that's gonna do it. Sorry for the background noise.